Hello, everyone. This is the RFID Talks, and I'm here with Claire Swedberg. We have also Marco Roberti, founder and former editor of the RFID Journal, and me, Edson Perrin, the editor of the IOP Journal. We are going to talk about the state of the RFID in retail all over the world in this edition. So I will start asking Claire about her vision in this area because she has lots of articles. She is reporting and talking with companies every time. So, Claire, how is it for you?
Yeah, Edson, thanks for
Hello.
having me. Yep, thanks for having me. And I'm delighted to be participating in your program, RFID Talks. So
Thank you.
let me answer that question related to retail. I've been covering RFID for, I think my first story that I saw was 2005. And at that time, we were writing about retail. And we are still writing about retail, but it's changed so much. So it's worth looking at the trends. I think that's been quite significant in the last couple of years. We've seen RFID really taking off. So originally, when I was writing about pallets and the movement of goods through a warehouse, has transitioned to what we have today, which is a very complex environment with retailers trying to sell online. They're trying to use their stores as potentially a mini warehouse in some cases. And they need more visibility than they've ever needed. And the pressure is really on for retailers. And that's part of what's driving, I think, a new stage in the adoption of RFID.
And Mark, what is your vision that, and what's the level we are now for you, and where are we going?
Well, I think it's still very much early days. We probably have less than 1% of all items sold in retail stores are currently tagged. I would say it's obviously higher than that in apparel retail, which is taking off for some very specific reasons, which I can explain briefly. But we're definitely seeing an acceleration. It had been building steadily. We're seeing more companies like Nike and Adidas and others using RFID. But I think COVID really gave the market a jolt. And the reason that is a lot of retail CEOs kind of thought their inventory management was okay, that it was 98% or whatever. And what they found was when people started doing buy online, pick up in store, the store associates had to go find the items. And often they couldn't find them. And so orders had to be canceled and orders had to be delayed. And sometimes orders had to be fulfilled out of multiple stores, which if they were shipping from the stores, increased the cost, right? Instead of one package with 2 items in it, I have to pay to ship 2 items in separate packages. So there were reports that were being generated, how many of these orders for buy online, pick up in store, buy online, ship from store were being fulfilled. And the numbers were appallingly low. And so that woke up a lot of CEOs to the fact that, their inventory accuracy is not 98%. In some cases, on average, it's about 65%. And in some fast moving goods, it's as low as 35%. So I think that's really given an impetus for more retailers to look at RFID. And I think, as Claire said, the environment is much more complex now. There's much more pressure on retailers. It's so easy to jump from buying the item at this store to, hey, I'll look online and see if the competitor has it and go buy from the competitor. So all of those things, I think, are driving renewed interest in RFID in retail.
And what are the challenges for the market to use more and more RFID in your vision, Claire, first?
There are multiple, obviously, obstacles for some of them. There's challenges for some of them. As Mark just said, this is kind of early days in some ways. The stories that I was writing a little while ago tended to be around retailers that were early adopters, that maybe were selling products that they actually made themselves. So they had control over manufacturing and when those tags were applied to the goods. Today, you've got a lot of retailers that want RFID tagged goods, but those goods are not coming specifically from a controlled area. They're coming from various locations, various sources. Some are tagged, some are not tagged. That is a huge challenge to first, if nothing, I mean, it sounds like the simplest thing, but how do you make sure there's a tag on every piece of apparel, every product that you're selling? And if there's not a tag on every single one of them, how can you really use the system effectively? So I think that's kind of one of the early challenges that a lot of retailers are facing. And that's where they're starting to work with their brands and say, this is on you guys too. We need to get this stuff tagged at source.
And Mark, tagging products when they are manufactured is the way to use more RFID in stores or everywhere.
Absolutely, and I think Claire hit on it. The tagging issue is the biggest challenge. If you're a smaller retailer and you buy from multiple sources, just think, for example, of somebody who owns, let's say, 2 or 3 beachwear shops in resort locations, right? I go to Florida and there's a little shopping area down by the beach. And, if you go in there, there's people selling sandals and hats and sunglasses and flip-flops and things you wear at the beach. Well, they don't have the power to go tell their manufacturer, we want you to put an RFID tag on it, right? So if they wanted to tag that stuff, and I've talked to people who, have come to me and asked me if they could do that, they would have to manually tag those items themselves, associate the item with the unique identifier in the tag, and then put that in their database so that they could walk around with a handheld, take inventory, and replenish when necessary. It's really not feasible to do this manually. And if you're a big retailer, as Claire said, you're getting goods from some brands like Nike that are tagging a lot of their stuff, and you're getting goods from brands that don't want to tag, don't want the extra expense. And so how do you get them to go along? And if you have some tagged items in your store and some untagged items, how do you manage that inventory? You could do it by department. If you could get everybody in one department to do it, then you could say, okay, we're going to manage this inventory in this department with RFID, and the other departments will do with barcodes. But this really is the biggest challenge. And it's starting to change. So some of the brands that are using RFID internally in their stores also sell elsewhere. Nike is a good example. Under Armour is another good example. And as more and more of those guys start to adopt and start to tag all of their inventory, it means more and more tagged goods are appearing in other stores, and it makes it easier for those retailers to then say, okay, well, we're going to start to use RFID. There is a tipping point. What happens is I'm tagging, let's say, 10% of my goods now. Well, I'm gonna keep those things separate because, if I tag all my items, there's an extra expense, and maybe some retailers aren't even asking me for it. So some are, 10% are, and the other 90% are not. But if I get to 50% or 60%, I don't know exactly what the number is. It may be different for each brand owner. But if I get close to a point where I say, you know what, I might as well just tag everything, because the cost of managing tagged and untagged inventory is too difficult and too costly. It's just cheaper to put tags on everything. A, you get a volume discount. B, you have a single process. And C, you wipe out all the labor associated with keeping separate inventories. So at some point, a lot of brand owners are going to say, I'm just going to tag everything. And as more and more of those hit that point, you get an acceleration where more and more retailers say, I'm getting tagged goods, I might as well start using RFID. So, you know, I often get asked, well, when is that going to happen? And if I knew, you know, I would probably play the stock market and make a lot of money. But I don't know. And the reason we don't know is because there are a lot of things that are going on behind the scenes that we don't really have visibility into. So there are retailers, big retailers, who are doing their first pilot. They may be 3 years away from a big rollout. There are other retailers who have done multiple pilots and are starting to deploy in certain departments. And it may take a year or 18 months for them to roll out to more departments, or, you know, roll out to store wide. So there's all this stuff that's happening in the background. And how quickly that happens will kind of determine how quickly we reach that tipping point where it makes sense for all the big retailers to use RFID.
Yeah, I see here we have a company here in Brazil called iTag. You know, Mark, and you also know Claire. iTag is an integrator, is a solution provider in RFID, and they have a client, a customer in Paraguay, country right here near Brazil, and this company sells Nike products, and they are using their tags because iTag implemented them for them a solution in RFID, and they are using the tags that come with the product because they are manufactured with the with the tags. They have the tags since the factory, so they are using that to control their inventory and also to the checkout. They are using everything with RFID. So this is very interesting that companies that are manufacturing products with RFID, they are spreading more the technology than others. I believe this is happening in lots of places I see. And Claire, about with your experience, do you have this vision too?
Yeah, I have to say, if I could get money for every time I heard the word tipping point in my career, I'd be a very rich woman. But we might be there. I know there is such a thing as a tipping point where you, like, as you just described it, and you've got brands that are seeing benefit and let's just tag everything. And retailers then gain some benefits, even if they weren't necessarily past that point of actually deploying RFID themselves. So obviously it all has to happen on both ends. And brands, for them, I think one of the other interesting points for them is that if they are tagging some of their goods and others not, it becomes a cost of manufacturing and labor in separating and dividing those products when we're reaching a point where tags are low cost enough that I think we're going to get to a point where you say, you know, if for the cost of the tags to put it on all my apparel or other products, I might as well do it because I do gain enough value from that and decrease my cost in sorting goods that are either RFID tagged or not.
And Mark, how do you see the solution for companies to adopt more RFID than they are using now?
Well, I think one of the things that is little understood or little appreciated by RFID solution providers is that deploying an RFID solution for any company involves risk. And it's not just RFID, it's almost any technology that you decide to implement. I worked at Information Week before I started RFID Journal, and we surveyed CIOs, and we found that 50% of all IT projects ended in failure. So we want to deploy a
ERP.
ERP system, or even something simpler like an employee management application, right? 50% of the time, those things didn't work out. So there's loss of money involved. There's loss of time involved. There's competition for resources. So if I'm let's say I'm the supply chain VP of supply chain, and I say to my boss, we got to use RFID because we have some supply chain issues and we need to use this. and I push it through, and we get, let's say, $10 million to deploy this in our multiple facilities, and it goes badly, what's going to happen? I'm going to get fired. So I say, I don't want to take that risk. I would rather just, try to address the issues we have piecemeal here and there, fix this, fix that, and not put my job on the line. Now, that's not a good way to manage scared, but the truth is that that's what is happening in a lot of companies. The other thing is that many human beings, and I don't know the percentage, I haven't studied this, but there are people who embrace change. Something new comes along, they're like, hey, this is great. And then there are other people who say, nah, I don't really like this. I'm uncomfortable with this. And I'll give you an example. The three of us have a good friend, John Hull, who was the art director at RFID Journal for many years. I worked with John in the 1980s when personal computers were being introduced in publishing. And design went from paste boards and galleys and cutting up galleys to designing pages on a computer. And John, was a little bit afraid of this change and said, I don't think I need to learn computers. This is for the people under me. They'll do that, and I'll just give them advice on how to do it. Well, of course, John eventually realized that the whole world was moving towards computers, and he had to learn, and he did, and he actually knows a lot more about using computers in some ways than I do. I often ask him how to do certain things on a Mac. So the same goes with RFID. If you hear there's a better way, but it's new, it's different, it's a little bit scary, the natural human instinct for many people is to say, you know what, I'm really uncomfortable with that. And the thing I think that gets you over the risk concern and the fear concern is competition. What I've seen in my 22 years in the RFID industry is that when your direct competitor shows you that something is better and it's working for them, you realize, I don't care how afraid I am. If I don't do this, I'm going to get left behind. And then you jump on board and you start doing it. And I'll just give a quick example. I don't know how many years ago, it's probably about 10 years ago now, Marks and Spencer announced that they were going to tag everything in their stores. They had been doing men's apparel for years, and they decided that, they could pretty much do everything except, pots and pans. And now they even do that. And that year, so they announced that in, I believe it was January or February of the year. And then we held an event in London later that year in September. And we had way more UK retailers than we had ever had before. And I think they saw that if they didn't do what Marks and Spencer was doing, they were going to get left behind. And now River Island and lots of other guys in the UK are using RFID in a big way. So I think it's the competition that gets you over the hump. And so why we have a tipping point is, as more people do it, more of their competitors say, hey, I better go do it. And then as those people do it, more of their competitors say, hey, I better go do it. So it kind of snowballs.
Yeah. I see here in Brazil, the market is investing more and more, because companies, the retailers more than the others, but they see their competitors doing investments in RFID, so they start doing this too, because they see, if they don't, probably in a couple of years they will be very far from the first from the leaders. So they have to follow them. Big companies are making smaller companies start tagging their products. They are convincing, like Walmart in the US. We have some big companies here, like Renner stores, or even Alvan. and they are always pushing people to invest, other companies to invest in RFID because they say, "Oh, I'm not going to buy products that are not tagged." So people will start tagging their products to be part of the game. And some companies are learning a lot of things when they start tagging their products. Some of them, because of the obligation to be accomplished with their big network, big stores, they they learn that they can improve their control, their products control, their inventory, and also accelerate the way they are manufacturing their products, or know when they have to buy more raw material for their production. So this is very interesting, and this is more than just uh, asking for to tag the products. When big companies do that, they really improve the market. They accelerate the way companies are using the tags. Can you see that too, Claire? You do more than I do in this area, covering stores and companies that are using RFID.
Yeah, I have to echo what you're both saying that not only is the competition doing it for a lot of companies, and so they kind of have to get on board and start learning the technology they might not have been comfortable with, but there's also comfort is at the center of this too, because if you're the first one doing it, that's really it's a rare company that has people on board that want to take on that role of, let's be the pioneers, let's try it first. And there's just so much experimenting, and there isn't just the knowledge isn't there to help them as they run into problems along the road. They do their pilots, and there's a failure in something that could have been easily corrected, but they just don't have the background to go to somebody who's already done that and solved that problem. So there's so much comfort in knowing that somebody else like you has already done it. They're clearly successful. Sometimes the talent behind that company moves to another company and brings that knowledge to the other company. I mean, I see that kind of thing happening, and it's going to grow from there. So every time I write a story about some retailer who has solved an interesting problem that I would never have thought of myself, maybe their solution provider hadn't thought of it before, and they go in and they solve that problem, and now the next company to come along and learn from that experience, they're going to benefit too. So one example that's coming into my mind is a retailer that was picking up stray reeds from tagged goods. I think they were Nike shoes. We're talking about Nike quite a bit here, but they had Nike shoes in another store across the wall, and they were picking up tag reads from both stores, a kind of thing that I hadn't thought of before, and their provider hadn't thought of it before, and they have to find a way to filter out the stray reads, things like that. It takes some of those early pioneers to first come up with solutions, but then as more and more of those problems get resolved, it's not an issue anymore. It's not something I'm going to be writing about in a story, because that's already been solved, and the next company is going to benefit from that. So I do see us reaching that point too, where we're benefiting from the early work that was done by what we're going to call the pioneers here.
Yeah.
Mark, do you believe that we covered all this idea of the state of the RFID in stores or in retail?
Well, I would like to ask Claire about what she's seeing in terms of the types of deployments. I mean, from what I see, the vast majority of retailers are using handhelds to go around and take inventory. Once every 2 weeks, once a week, depending on the size of the store and your needs. But I'm wondering if some of them now are adopting some of the solutions that started to appear on the market a couple of years ago, like overhead readers. There's robotic readers that roam up and down the aisles and have a reader that can pick up tagged items. Are you seeing any of those solutions being adopted, Claire?
That's a great question, Mark. I'm definitely seeing that technology evolve, and I'm seeing lots of it out there, either being piloted or released and announced. I think time is going to tell over the next year or two whether that's actually commonly being deployed. But one thing I've noticed transition is early on, people would say, let me compare the time it takes for my employees to go around and scan barcodes and count goods. And we'll compare that against doing it with a handheld. And now we've got companies saying, let's compare the time it takes for someone to walk around with a handheld once a week or maybe once a day. And let's see what we can save if we just capture all those tags from one overhead reader. And I've just got it all the time. I have those numbers. I know where the goods are. And is it going to be worthwhile for the cost of installing the readers and the antennas? Not to mention all the software behind it. Is that going to be worthwhile in saving of labor? And of course, the value of knowing in real time that all my black sweaters have been placed in they're in the wrong part of the store and they're not selling because of that. There's a lot of value, but the question is, how does that balance out? And I think that's yet to be seen. I don't know about you, Mark, but I haven't seen a lot of examples that I can point to yet where I can say, clearly this is working for these retailers.
Yeah, there have been there's a lot of interest in overhead readers that give you real-time visibility. And in my experience, that's the ultimate goal of what almost all retailers want. The challenge has been that when an RFID tag is stationary, it's harder to read. As it moves through the read field, it's easier to pick up. And the other issue is when you have multiple tags stacked on top of each other or one behind the other, it becomes very hard to read all of those. So what happens with overhead readers is if you just tagged everything in your store, turned on the overheads, you might get, 60-65% of the items, reading. As people go through the store and they move stuff around, someone picks something up, they put it back, you pick up more and more reads. And over a day or two, you will get to 100% or very close to 100%. But that change, again, is another risk factor. Like, is that really going to work? Is that really good enough? This kind of not real time, but near real time inventory, or this rolling inventory where we're picking up more and more stuff over time. Is that really a good enough solution? And I think there are kind of two elements to it that will eventually move the market in that direction. One is that the overhead readers will get cheaper and they'll get better. And the sensitivity of the tags has already dramatically improved over the last 5 to 10 years. So I think you'll get more and more items with those overheads, and they'll be less and less expensive. They'll still be a bigger investment than the handhelds, but the payoff can be much greater. For example, today, retailers have very little understanding of how customers interact with their products. Did I pick it up? Did I pick up these jeans and put them back? Did I try them on and then not buy them? Did I try them on and buy them? All these things that go on in the store that would be invaluable to know, retailers can't know. But if you combine RFID with some video analytics, and you say, okay, people are picking up this item, putting it back. We see it moving. We see someone carrying it through the store. Then at the last minute, maybe they leave it somewhere else. We can begin to understand what's the problem with some of these products, and we can address those problems and say, for example, if two dresses get taken into the dressing room 100 times a month, and one of them sells 50 dresses or 30 dresses, and the other one sells 2, then maybe there's an issue with the cut of the dress. The design is nice, people like it, but then when they try it on, it doesn't fit properly. So maybe there needs to be an adjustment to the way the dress is cut, and then you can do that and you can sell those dresses. So there's a lot of intelligence that comes with having that real-time visibility about what's moving in the store, what's being picked up, what's not being picked up. So I think that's the direction we're going. I think it's going to be a while before we get there. It's going to take the price of the readers to come down. They need to be easier to install. And the other thing they need, and I don't think the RFID industry fully understands this, is they need to be good looking. I've had retailers say to me, they look at a reader, an overhead reader, and said, I will never put that in my store. It's so ugly. So you have to have something that doesn't compromise the look of the stores, because that means a lot to the retailers.
Yeah, but you said something that's very interesting, Mark. I saw in a project.
Just one thing, Ed? I just said one thing that's interesting?
No, you said lots of things, lots of different things,
Okay,
interesting
good.
things. But I heard one that I like it. The idea I saw in a store that was a dressing room. They had just in the dressing room the reader in the top, the fixed reader in the top. So they had all information of the products that went there, and so the ones that went there where the by exclusion they could know which one people were not taking to try. So this was very interesting to see how the products were working in the store, and the other parts of the store they were using
Mhm.
handheld readers because they are cheaper. So I think the technology has lots of different ways of use. So you don't have to put that in your store everywhere to know about the products. But sometimes, if you use in a dressing room, you are going to have good information. This is a project I saw it was 5 or 6 years ago,
Yeah.
and they had good success on that.
Yeah. And the other thing about dressing rooms is that it's a place of theft. So people will go in with multiple items, stuff them in a bag, or even put on multiple pairs of jeans, one over the other, and then walk out. So by having that insight into what's going into the store, into the dressing room, what's coming out, it gives people some insight so they can reduce theft, they can market better. It gives you a lot of intelligence. But you said an interesting thing, that they're using the fixed infrastructure in the dressing room, and they're using handhelds. And I think one of the problems that I see with the end user community is they don't educate themselves well enough to know there are different ways of deploying RFID. What they tend to do is they go to a company that deploys these solutions, and I don't want to name any names, but we know which are some of the leading providers. And they say, what should we do? And the company does what they've done for other retailers, and it might not be ideal for you. It might not get you what you need, or it might be more expensive. And then you say, we're not going to do it because we don't want to put fixed infrastructure everywhere. Well, you don't necessarily need to do that. So I'm a strong believer that if the potential user learns about RFID, they can ask the right questions of their technology partners. They can steer them in a right direction. Say, this information would be very, very helpful. Yeah, that other information you're offering me would be kind of nice to have, but not really critical. This other stuff is critical. So your business better than anyone. They know RFID, your business. If you learn a little bit about RFID, you're going to be in a better position, because they're not going to learn about your business. What they know is what they learned at other people's businesses, not your business. So I think it's really important for anyone listening. If you're thinking about deploying an RFID solution, get educated. Go to a conference, go online, spend a little bit of time. There are resources where you can learn about RFID and the different types and the different solutions available.
That was the subject I was going to propose to you to the next to our next show. So about training, I believe this is very important, and lots of companies are doing this with their to train their channel to use their products, and also to explain how end users can take advantage of their products. So, Claire, if you want to add something to conclude our conversation today, and what do you think about this idea for the next show?
Yeah, it's a great subject, and I think a very I'd say there's a lot to it when it comes to solution providers and what they can do to help their customers understand the value of the data, how to use the data, how to get it in the first place, and make sure that that system is working the way they need it. And then I'm also, someday it will be interesting to talk about some of the future looking things going on in retail when it comes to point of sale, EAS, detecting, kind of going, beyond what Mark was talking about, people taking things, stashing them away in the dressing room. Well, let's see, can we detect that as it goes out the door? These are things that now that retailers do have tags on their products, it's like, all right, let's start looking at what more we can do with it, and whether their solution providers are helping them with that or not. It's interesting to see where that is going to go, and how fast and in which direction. So that's something we can talk about too.
Yeah, good. And what about you, Mark?
We haven't really touched on some of the regulatory things that might be driving adoption. So there's some stuff going on in pharma that could potentially impact RFID adoption, and in retail, digital product passports are another thing that could well push adoption of RFID, as we have to track more and more goods for recycling and disposal for the sake of sustainability. So those are some of the key topics, I think, that are out there.
So these are the next presentations here at RFID Talks. Thank you for watching, and thank you, Claire and Mark, for being part of this.
Thank you.
See you next time.